elephants, snake charmers with cobras, peacocks, and chaotic bazaars, the images most people associate with modern India. The paradox of India is that all these things exist side by side with the satellite dishes, mobile phones, cars, and computers. Like the charmed cobra, visitors and travelers over the centuries have surrendered to the fascination of India's extraordinary culture, which is as colorfully diverse as it is mystical and even mysterious. As old as the ancient civilizations of Egypt and Mesopotamia, India is unique amongst these ancient societies in that its culture and beliefs have withstood many upheavals from within, as well as invasions from without, to remain virtually the only society in the world with living religious and social systems so old that they are still vital and intact, and showing no signs of dying out, even after 5,000 years.
History Hit is an award-winning streaming platform built by history fans for history fans. Delve into the history of the ancients with History Hit's exclusive offering of documentaries. Explore with us the enchanting Temple of Karnak, or take a deep dive into the fascinating prehistory of Scotland. We also aim to bring you the stories and legends that shaped our world through our award-winning podcast network. Sign up now for a free trial, and Odyssey fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code Odyssey at checkout.
Although early Indian cave paintings from 8000 BC to 3000 BC show people with bows and spears hunting deer, peacocks, and even giraffes and ostrich, the earliest excavated settlements in India are of the pre-Harappan period. These were wheat-growing and animal farming communities from 3500 BC, the remains of which have been found in Baluchistan, Quetta Valley, and Kalat, all in modern-day Pakistan. Similar settlements have also been found in Afghanistan. The Harappan civilization was so called because of its largest excavated settlement was found at Harappa in Pakistan, where so many other Harappan period sites have been excavated, including Mohenjo-Daro.
Mohenjo-Daro threw a spanner in the works because it suggested that here was this great urban entity in India without any obvious connections with Europe or with the rest of the habitable world. Much effort was made to discover connections with Mesopotamia to show how one might have sprung out from the other. What archaeologists have discovered today is that really Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa are just the tip of the iceberg.
Harappan civilization was centered in the valley of the Indus River. Many towns of this period have been excavated along the Indus, and it is also believed that there are many more still to be found.
The earliest period that we can talk about are basically on the basis of excavations done at Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. And this civilization dates back to about 5,000 years in history. Looking at the planning of the cities, they're extremely modern in concept. They're wide, open roads. There is a perfect drainage system which interconnects throughout the city.
The first major urban Indian civilization, Mohenjo-Daro, flourished from 2300 BC until 1500 BC and was discovered accidentally by 2 British engineers in 1856, who used the ancient archaeological remains of the city as material for the foundation of a railway they were building. earliest roots of the Hindu religion can be seen in the art of this period. The mother goddess worshipped in this society later evolved into the Hindu goddess Kali. Another important Harappan god later came to be identified as Shiva. A significant legacy of the Indus Valley civilization is the cultivation of Gossypium arboreum, or cotton plant. Weaving and dyeing of cloth also originated here and were among the luxuries that India was to become world-renowned for, as it is even today. Women of the Indus Valley cities probably wore saris very much like those worn now. The fragments of cloth excavated at Mohenjo-Daro show a very highly developed skill in spinning and weaving. And it is clear that this is the type of cloth that was so highly valued in ancient Greece and Rome.
There was this enormous gap between the rich and the poor, between the nobility and the peasantry. While the nobles paraded in Mecca velvets and in embroidered caps, the poor wore nothing but coarse cottons. In fact, clothing itself was very sparse.
The fortunes of the Harappans changed dramatically with the arrival of the tribes of Arya from Central Asia, who swept into India around 1500 BC. Some calamity of nature, like a sudden change in their environment, forced the Aryans to leave the steppes of Russia, conquering all of the known world at the time. The Aryans also crossed the forbidding Hindu Kush mountains into India and were to change the subcontinent forever. Soon afterwards, the Indus Valley civilization appears to have collapsed rapidly and vanished. The history of the Aryans in India comes to us in the form of their language, Sanskrit, their poetry, which was memorized and passed on by repetition, and their religion, which is very close to the modern Hinduism practiced today by the majority of Indians. The invading Aryans gradually absorbed the beliefs of the Indian religion, as the important Aryan gods took on the attributes of the local Indian gods. The Aryans added a new god to their pantheon. This was Indra, a god of war and also of rain. Being a young god, Indra was inclined to get into fights, drink too much, and eat everything he could lay his hands on.
By this time, a caste system was evolving, which became so engendered in the social fabric of life that people just fell into compartments, and they were doing things which their fathers or their grandfathers were doing. So skills passed on from father to son, their professions passed on from father to son. The caste system was so strong that the highest form in this system was the Brahmins. This was followed by the Kshatriyas, who were the warrior class, which was followed by the Vaishyas, they were the administrative class, and the Shudras, which were the lowest class. There was no intercaste marriages. This was to preserve the people belonging to a particular caste.
It was in a kingdom near Nepal, in about 565 BC, that Prince Siddhartha was born. His family belonged to the Kshatriya, warrior caste. Siddhartha grew up to renounce his privileged life of luxury, leave his young wife and small child, and become a wandering hermit in search of spiritual salvation. Siddhartha was later named Buddha, meaning the enlightened one, and his beliefs were the basis of a religious philosophy which emphasized compassion for the suffering of others, the practice of meditation, and the principle that desire and sorrow are the cause of all the suffering in the world. Buddhism was unique amongst the Indian religions because in addition to monasteries, there were Buddhist nunneries which allowed women to devote themselves to a religious life. Otherwise, women had no independent status in Indian society in the 6th century BC.
By this time, the Brahmins had taken over the religious ceremonies which were being held in every household, which previously were conducted by women. So the women got relegated to the background. They were just, as a housewife, they were conducting their duties.
The woman's value is in the maintenance of the house, and a good woman is like a goddess. You know, she'll take care of all the prosperity in the house. In other words, it's a very patriarchal logic that you find running all through this time period. Now that is the evidence that comes through the literature. The same literature also provides us with several episodes, however, where you have examples of women playing extremely important social and political roles. I mean, at precisely the same time period when all these patriarchal statements were being made, there was a queen that ruled from Delhi.
The influence of Buddhism on Indian society is still visible, and some of the finest pieces of Indian art are devoted to Buddha. Buddhism spread across all of Asia and has many followers today all over the world. About the time that Buddha began his spiritual quest, the kingdom of Gandhara had come under the rule of the Persians, who Alexander of Macedon had desired to conquer completely. With its reputation as a land of endless riches and fantastic creatures, the conquest of India held a lure for Alexander the Great. When he arrived at Taxila, the capital of Gandhara, Alexander was welcomed by the people of the kingdom without resistance in 326 BC. But his advance to Punjab was met with such relentlessly fierce fighting that although victorious, for the first time his famously disciplined army mutinied and refused to fight. Alexander had no option but to take them home. By the time Ashoka came to the throne in 269 BC, the only part of India not under the dominion of the Mauryan Empire was the region ruled by the Kalingas, the current-day state of Orissa. In keeping with the tradition of his forefathers, Ashoka set to the task of acquiring the territory of the Kalinga kingdom. The subjugation of this kingdom to Mauryan rule resulted in more than 250,000 people being killed or captured, and later dying of starvation and disease. The horror of human suffering on this scale so moved Ashoka that he became a Buddhist and gave up the pursuit of power through the conquest of other kingdoms. Ashoka immediately embarked on a campaign to announce his decision to rule the empire according to the Buddhist principle of Dharma, or righteousness. To make his new beliefs known, Ashoka had his edicts inscribed on huge stone columns, which were then erected all over the country. Ashoka was also revered for presiding over the first great council of Buddhist priests, at which the Buddhist writings were collected into formal scripture. It is due to the initiative of Ashoka that Buddhism became one of the great religions of the world, and even after its influence had declined in India, it flourished in other Asian countries, as it still does today. Ashoka's kingdom was impeccably administered, and by this time, society was neatly divided into rural villages, which provided the food, rent, and tax needed to maintain the vast imperial establishment. Towns and cities also had well-structured government bureaucracies which managed every aspect of people's lives. To maintain well-balanced communities, the government would offer incentives of land and livestock to craftspeople to go and settle in particular villages where their skills were needed.
We learned that there were efficient craftsmen who could do work in gold, silver, lead, tin, and there are also traces of work done in bone and ivory.
Ashoka and his governors realized that while the wealth of the empire came from the multitude of tiny farming communities, every village needed blacksmiths, potters, and tavern keepers.
In terms of their dietary habits, wheat and lentils were the staple, and those who could afford it, which means the upper classes, there was meat to be had, although it was expensive.
The Mauryan Empire disintegrated bit by bit after Ashoka's death in 232 BC. In 184 BC, the last Mauryan emperor, a descendant of Ashoka, was murdered by his commander-in-chief, ending the first great Indian dynasty, which had lasted for about 140 years. The usurper had no sympathy for the Buddhist ideals of compassion and toleration. He killed Buddhists and destroyed many monasteries before restoring orthodox Hinduism. The next centuries saw many smaller dynasties and empires rise and fall all over the subcontinent. It was a period which has given us a great and varied cultural legacy. The Buddhist sculpture from the Gandharan region combines the delicacy of Greek classicism with the stylized serenity of Indian Buddhist images. By the 6th century AD, many of the Han invaders of the previous century had assimilated into Indian society, and their descendants, the martial Rajputs, held sway over north and central India. The Rajputs were great patrons of the arts, and it was during their reign that the most magnificent temples were built. Particularly those at Khajuraho in Madhya Pradesh. This huge complex was built between the 10th and 11th centuries by the Chandela dynasty of central India. The largest and earliest of the Khajuraho temples is the Lakshmana, built around 950 AD. Its base is decorated with battle scenes, while the friezes on the higher levels depict every possible sexual activity. In fact, one of the most famous features of this temple complex, apart from the obvious merits of its engineering and architecture, is the profusion of erotic sculpture which covers almost every surface. The reason for this emphasis on sex remains a mystery, although in the Hindu religion it is one of the believer's religious duties to get married at the appropriate time and be a good spouse. According to the scriptures, for a man this is as soon as he has finished his education, at about 20, and the woman was supposed to be 1/3 of his age. During the marriage ceremony, the groom vows to behave well toward his bride in the 3 traditional aims of Hindu marriage: piety, wealth, and finally, pleasure. It is the religious duty of a good Hindu man to have sex with his wife regularly and to give her pleasure. In addition to war and sex, dance is also featured in the carved images at Khajuraho and other temples. This may be considered an expression of bhakti, a Hindu concept which has been described as the urge to dance and sing one's god. The dancing figures carved on the Khajuraho temples are stylized, just like the forms of Indian dance are stylized. The Asparas, or divine female creatures, are idealized feminine beauties. They were said to have foreheads shaped like the waxing moon, eyes like lotus buds, and lips like the bow.
The central theme that runs through them all is this element of the drama on the one hand, and in the solo forms, it's the element of the Naika, the woman. And that woman is not just woman as we know woman. It's the human soul, it's the Jivatma. So it is man, woman. That is a person who is vulnerable to all the elements and all the ups and downs of life. And that Jivatma is constantly striving to be united with the Paramatma. That is the perfect being, the perfect soul. So this is the theme of all solo interpretation. Every village and every state in the country has a particular dance drama form, if that's what you'd like to call it. It was total drama. The actor was not just reciting words and the poetic quality of the drama, but he danced as well, he sang as well, he played an instrument as well. There was a little step in between, just before he killed his opponent, if you like. And that is the coming together of talas and ragas and everything in the dance drama.
Arabia, a new religion was taking hold. Islam grew out of Judaism and Christianity to become a force that would transform the constantly warring Arab tribes into a unified nation. With this new unity, they would invade and conquer virtually every land in every direction that they turned towards, from Asia Minor to Africa, and from Spain to France, across the steppes into Central Asia. This faith, when it encountered the ancient Hindu religion with its elaborate caste system, was to create a radical change in every aspect of Indian society, including religion and politics, but most dramatically, Indian culture. In 1175, Muhammad of Ghur, with his lieutenant Kubd ad-Din, attacked Sindh. Muhammad's goal was to build an empire. After taking Sindh, he went on to Punjab, where he set his sights on the Rajput kingdoms that were busy fighting each other. Kubd ad-Din was left by Muhammad to control the new territory of Delhi, and for the next 20 years he ensured that one state after another fell to the Turks in a period of terrible bloodshed which saw the demise of Buddhism in India as monks were slaughtered and their monasteries destroyed. Then in 1206, Muhammad of Ghur was assassinated, and Kubd ad-Din became ruler of the kingdom that came to be known as the Delhi Sultanate. To commemorate his triumph, Kubd ad-Din began construction of the Kubd Minar in 1199, a tapering stone tower 260 feet high.
The Qutub complex, with its minars, mosques, late Mughal gardens, commemorative columns, buildings which span almost 800 years in time, is today a World Heritage Complex. The Qutub has a central core of random rubble dressed stone, which is locally available in Delhi. So it was probably quarried and brought to this place with the help of elephants, horses or whatever, and then erected in this manner. So there was a central core around which there was an outer core of random rubble, and the staircase passed on between them. And finally, the Qutub Minar is dressed in fine red sandstone, which was brought over 200 miles from Agra, which is not locally available, and shows the importance of architecture of the Minar itself at that period of time.
The Kubd Minar and the mosque attached to it were built on the foundations of an ancient Jain temple, parts of which were used for the new mosque, as had become the custom amongst the Muslim conquerors of India.
Today we are standing in the middle of this colonnade, the columns of which at some point would have adorned the 27 Hindu temples which stood on this site before the coming of the slave dynasty. These bells the Vastupurush motifs, and many other Hindu deities which adorn these temples were defaced with plaster so that they're not shown within the mosque complex, as Islam forbade the use of human figures and any other living being in its mosques. These lofty arches give you the direction of Mecca, the holy city of the Muslims. And this being probably the first mosque in India, was later enlarged by Qutbuddin's successor Iltutmish and the illustrious Khalji king Alauddin Khalji. The stones in the mosque were put together using iron dowels, which over years have contracted and expanded, thereby pushing out the pieces of the stone. This is quite unlike the stones in the Hindu columns, which have been put together using a little plaster. We are today standing at the base of the Quwwatul Islam Mosque, which has been constructed of putting together these highly engraved pieces of Delhi stone, which was engraved by Hindu craftsmen. And you see a lot of these floral, ornamental carvings next to these Quranic inscriptions which come together in a mosque. So this is one of those cases where a Muslim mosque was built by Hindu craftsmen who had over 1,000 years of experience in stone carving.
Here what we have is the presence of a Muslim architect or a Muslim master, perhaps telling the Hindu craftsman, saying, this is what I would like as a statement of my belief. And the Hindu craftsman saying, well, if you would like this as a statement of your belief, this is the manner my hand can craft it for you. So here you have the Kutu Mosque made by Hindus for the Muslims.
1320 AD, a new Turkish Mongol dynasty, the Tuglags, gained control of the Delhi Sultanate, and they moved the capital from Delhi to Tuglakabad. This was a heavily fortified city with over 50 gates, some of them with ramps for elephants to enter the city. The unique feature of this new capital was the artificial lakes and reservoirs on which the city depended for its survival.
I'm sitting at the edge of a water tank known as Jahannam Ka Rasta. Literally translated, the name means way to hell. Since the city of Tuglakabad was built away from the river, water supply had to be thought of early on. At least traces of 9 tanks can be seen within the fort walls, with stored rainwater which was used through the year by the local inhabitants, by the palace people, and the army of the Sultan. Sultan Ghiyasuddin Tughlaq, who was the commander-in-chief in the Khalji army, was worried about the constant raids of the Mongols from the north and suggested to his Sultan to build a city at this point. The Sultan sarcastically remarked that if you become Sultan, you do it. It so happened that he did become Sultan, and the first thing he did was start the construction of this city. The area of the city is almost half a square mile, and the walls cover a perimeter of 6.5 kilometers. Some of them reaching a height of 90 feet and a thickness of almost 20 to 30 feet. The whole city was completed using complete slave labor and completed in a record period of just 4 years. The whole fort was divided into 3 major parts, which included the palace, the citadel, and the city. The palace and the citadel were further protected from the city by the use of huge barbicans and gateways. On the south side of the fort was protected by a large water barrier, and within this barrier stood a hilly outcrop. And Ghiyasuddin realized that if the hilly outcrop was taken over by the enemy could attack this fort using things like slingshots, chucking in dead animals to start disease, which would have resulted in the fort having to be abandoned. So he fortified this rocky outcrop, and it was only later that he got this whole idea of building his own tomb within that rocky outcrop much before he died.
Although it was more like a forbidding fortress than a cosmopolitan capital, a contemporary historian describes it as being so rich that the great palace was built of gold bricks, which when the sun rose shone so dazzlingly. Looking at the ruins of Tuglakabad today, the austerity makes it hard to believe that there could have been anything so fantastic at this desolate place. The Delhi Sultanates eventually collapsed due to infighting amongst various factions vying for dominance without a single strong leader to unify them. In 1526, a new age in Indian history began with the founding of the Mughal Empire by Babur, who, descending from both Tamerlane and Genghis Khan, was a young man in search of a kingdom. In addition to being a brilliant warrior, Babur is famous for his love of poetry and elegant gardens, which he would create wherever he went.
Prasannavadana Saubhagyadam Bhagyadam Hastabhyam Abhayapradam Maniganai
It is due to Babur and his heirs, Humayun, Akbar, and Shah Jahan, that the synthesis of Muslim and Hindu culture took the stunning form that has distinguished Indian civilization from the 16th century to the present.
What are the kinds of legacies for the present? You find them all around. I mean, you can look around here and notice some bizarre eclectic architectural styles reflective of a Hindu tradition and our so-called Muslim traditions. But perhaps most of all, I think would be our language, perhaps. Our language, our literature, our dress, our food, our forms of discourse, the way we address each other. These are all, by now such a mixture of things of the past and things of the medieval period that you can't even take the strands out anymore.
With its extremely diverse religions, people, culture, and artifacts, India has left a lasting impression all over the world, and it has contributed in its own way to the rest of the world. The finest example of cross-culture can be seen in the city of Delhi itself. The city's foundation was laid by the Hindus. Its ornamentation was done by the Muslims. It was bedecked like a new bride by the British. And today it's a mega metropolis, bustling with so many different facets of its character, which have been handed over from times immemorial, which can be seen in some form or the other in its diverse cultures, diverse peoples, and diverse religions.
One of the symbols of this country is the Taj Mahal. Built in 1653 by Shah Jahan for his beloved queen. For many, it represents an affinity and appreciation of its peoples, which has been forged over the centuries by invasion and conflicts to create the present modern India.